Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Robert Opp. I'm the Chief Digital Officer of the United Nations Development Program, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of the Global Blockchain Business Council Blockchain Central at the UN General Assembly. I'm going to take a few minutes and tell you a little bit about the work that the United Nations Development Program does and how we incorporate new technologies like blockchain into our work. So with that, I will share my screen and show a bit of a presentation. So I think it's perhaps an understatement in these days to say that globally we're experiencing an unprecedented set of changes. Those changes are also accelerating. And they are some of the big trends going on, like migration, where we have over 70 million people that are forcibly displaced from their homes. That is the highest amount since World War II. We have 60 million people affected by extreme weather events. And those of you on the Gulf Coast of the United States or in California experiencing some of these weather events right now will, I think, have a lot of sympathy for that. We also have driving inequality still facing the globe, where 1.7 billion people are still not able to receive financial services. And then on top of that, we've got the COVID-19 pandemic, if that wasn't enough, where we expect 70 million, at least 70 million people more to join the ranks of the already 700 million people living in extreme poverty, which means that they live on less than $1.90 per day. So a lot of the, against that backdrop, we see that a lot of the emergence of new technologies is driving another kind of change in the world. And that is really this very powerful emergence of artificial intelligence based technologies, the blockchain, of course, which is the main topic of what we're talking about today, big data and very powerful data analytics. It's not just the emergence of these individual technologies, however, it's also the way that they converge and they combine to be able to offer extremely powerful platforms of change. So what we look at when we start as the United Nations Development Program, we look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that have been put in place and agreed upon by the member states of the United Nations. And these are the things that drive us forward. And we're looking at how we can adapt or adopt those technologies and accelerate our progress in achieving the SDGs, despite all of those trends that I've just mentioned. The United Nations Development Program is the United Nations Development Arm. We are present in 170 countries. We have around 17,000 employees globally, and we have large-scale programs in areas like climate change, governance, crisis prevention, and others. And UNDP has issued a digital strategy. So we recognize that the context in which development is taking place is dramatically changing as a result of the emergence of digital technologies. And so our ambition in the digital strategy is to really be a thought leader and a practice leader when it comes to adopting digital technologies for the purpose of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So UNDP has been investing in digital, and we started a digital transformation process. That's why I'm on board as Chief Digital Officer. But then COVID hit and everything changed again. So the relationship between COVID and digital technologies, I'm sure as many of you have noticed, is a very close one. And so digital technologies are not only powering some of our response around contact tracing or other ways that we're actually addressing the pandemic from a response point of view in the health sector, but it also is critical for enabling the world to continue working on remote platforms. And it's revealing some of the other issues that we see around misinformation around COVID and other issues. It's actually driving a kind of explosion of misinformation, like around, well, our Secretary General calls it an infodemic, actually, and it's around how there might be just misleading information that's not coming from governments or credible sources. And it also reveals that we have a very strong digital divide still in the world, where 50% of the world is still basically without internet connectivity. We've seen a very interesting response to COVID within the United Nations Development Program, where we're tracking over 200 examples of digital responses to COVID. These are things that are coming as a result and from our country offices around the world, responding to needs of their partner governments. And some of them are, I would say, quite interesting for, I'm sure, all of you who are looking at this and joining the conference today. It's like, how do we actually address COVID using digital responses? And we can break it into these three main categories. If I start from the bottom of this slide, it's a basic category around infrastructure and capacity building, where we see our government partners turning to us in the light of COVID and saying, can you help us with video conferencing facilities to keep our civil servants working? Can you help us make our connections for people to work remotely? Can you work on digital literacy for either civil servants or our populations? And then you have a level of digital solutions or tools that are being asked for by governments. This is around how to put government services online. So take an example of Bangladesh. Bangladesh has been able to scale up telemedicine to a level of 4,000 doctors being able to offer telemedicine and 350,000 patients who've received some sort of support via that system. We also see platforms around digital finance, what we call e-commerce platforms for small and informal traders who've been hurt by COVID. They're not able to actually access their normal markets, which are face-to-face, of course. So putting them on e-commerce is a way to keep them in business. This is being done through, in Uganda, for example, through our local partner, Jumia, which is an e-commerce provider. We have over 2,000 farmers who are able to sell their produce online. And then finally, in the level of strategic and policy type guidance, governments are turning to the United Nations Development Program and saying, can you help us on how we actually organize our digital strategy, our digital transformation? And importantly, how do we adapt our policies and regulatory environment to be able to appropriately use those technologies while protecting data privacy and other issues? And so across this digital stack, we call it, we see that a lot of the new technologies that we're talking about are directly applicable here, including some of those technologies like blockchain. And we know that blockchain is already having an impact on the development world. We see a number of examples from across different sectors. Projects that UNDP has been involved in particular include things like traceable supply chains for connecting producers to consumers. So producers of cocoa in Ecuador have been connected with consumers of chocolate as a result, and through a blockchain-based system that provides full transparency and accountability. We see efforts for financial transparency in Serbia, where we're able to track money flows and really have an auditable trail for accountability purposes. A joint project with kiva.org and the government of Sierra Leone looking at how digital identity and credit scores can extend financial services to people. Land registration that's being worked on in India and Uzbekistan, being able to have immutable records for land registration, and some really interesting experiments in crowdfunding for renewable energy projects, being able to raise money upfront by essentially selling slices of power generation, for example, solar installations, and then having the investors be paid back over time, all powered by a blockchain-based system. And there's a few thoughts that I will leave you with, and this is the last slide that I'll have. Observations around how we use new technologies for digital development, whether it's blockchain, artificial intelligence, or any other. COVID in particular has shone the light on the fact that a digital divide is still facing us. I mentioned before, there's about 45% of the population globally that still is unable to access internet. it is critical that we address this divide, because if you are on the wrong side of the digital divide, that you are not able to benefit from any of the things that I've just mentioned. Secondly, foundational systems are critical. So we need to really understand that space around identity, registries, and other aspects that are really those foundational kind of layers in societies, so that we're able to then build other applications on top. And lastly, the development and the deployment of new technologies really needs to be intentionally inclusive. This is something that I think often our developers of new technologies are not actually thinking about in terms of an international or global application. But we have to understand that unless we really think of inclusivity from the beginning, we are going to continue to leave people behind. And that's something, to all of you who are engaged in this sector, I would ask you to really look at. With that, I'm going to end my presentation. If you're working on things that would be interesting, my Twitter handle is on the screen right now. It's really a pleasure to have been with you this morning and able to talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing in UNDP on using new technologies. And again, I wish you a great day. Thanks very much.